Hey Optimancers, Chris here. The playtest 5 Barbarian introduced some pretty dramatic changes versus the 2014 version. Rage could now last as long as 10 minutes and could be maintained with a bonus action. Thrown weapons using strength were now used for both rage bonus damage and advantage through reckless attack. Weapon mastery was added to the class, and primal knowledge provided the barbarian significant benefits in the use of several skills. The playtest 5 Barbarian subclass, the Berserker, also had major changes. The most significant was their signature feature, Frenzy, which no longer caused exhaustion and provided a once per turn damage bonus to a reckless attack. The playtest 7 version maintains all the changes that I just referenced and introduces a few more, though it will be a far less dramatic shift from the playtest 5 Barbarian to the playtest 7 one than from playtest 5 to the Player's Handbook. So as usual, I'll cover the changes from both the 2014 Player's Handbook as well as the Barbarian and Berserker from Playtest 5. We have 3 additional subclasses to cover as well. The Path of the World Tree is an entirely new subclass, and the Totem Warrior from the Player's Handbook is now called the Path of the Wild Heart, and the Zealot from Xanathar's. That both appear here with revisions that I will cover as well. So let's get into it. The class chart looks pretty much the same as it did in Playtest 5. Barbarian rage uses and damage bonus scaling all matches the 2014 Player's Handbook. So let's go to level 1. Rage, unchanged from Playtest 5, with the increased duration, bonus action to maintain, thrown attacks included for bonus damage, and having playtested this quite a bit since Playtest 5, I can also add in that, in my experience, these changes are really impactful and nice. The wording is a bit different, like you don't actually have a 10-minute duration, lasts until the end of your next turn, but you can just keep extending it to get the 10-minute duration. In combat, usually making attacks is going to extend it for you, but outside of combat, you can use your bonus action to extend the rage. Unarmored defense hasn't changed from the Player's Handbook. This is usually worse than just wearing medium armor, but not a lot worse, so it does present an alternative for the player who wants the bare-chested, Conan-style barbarian. It's always worth noting that with the barbarian's unarmored defense, unlike the monks, the use of a shield is permitted. Weapon mastery is unchanged from playtest 5. Flex has been removed from the playtest, but it wasn't a very good option anyways. You can make pretty good builds with either weapon and a shield or two-handed weapons now. I played a pike-wielding barbarian with push that worked out very well. And I did a Morningstar with Sap on another Barbarian, and it worked out well as well. Generally, I suggest the Javelin as a throw-in weapon. That uses the slow mastery. You can do a Trident for topple and throw it, but the range is lower, and imposing the prone condition can actually be a bad thing when you're attacking with thrown weapons because you give yourself disadvantage on any remaining attack. I guess what you could do is take the Trident and the Javelin, make the Javelin your first attack and the Trident your second attack, then you'd be okay. At level 2, we get Danger Sense, and it has moved back to level 2 because it had been pushed to level 7 in the last playtest. Now, it's just straight advantage on dexterity saves unless you're incapacitated. I figure this is a good change. The 2014 Barbarian's advantage against dexterity saving throws against threats they can see is a restriction that sometimes causes disagreements, and it's not really adding anything, so good riddance. Reckless attack, so this is one of the most notable changes in this playtest 7 Barbarian. The playtest 5 Reckless attack worked with thrown weapons using strength, which is great, but now the benefit is extended to the start of your next turn. Being that the penalty lasted until the start of your next turn, this change just makes sense to me, and allows the Barbarian to make those off-turn attacks, whether they're attacks of opportunity or you held your attack action, whatever the reaction attack was, with the benefit of advantage. I also found that even veteran players didn't know they couldn't make reckless attacks off turn, so this is probably just a good change. Then we get to level 3, and we have Primal Knowledge. So this was introduced as a new Barbarian feature in Playtest 5. It was second level in Playtest 5, and allows the Barbarian to use their strength score for tests on the listed skills while they're raging. And with a 10-minute potential duration for rage, this covers a lot of the playing time. The only change here is descriptive, rather than mechanical, as they've added that primal knowledge hones your agility and senses. And as always, you can pick your subclass at level 3. Level 4, you get your ability score increase, same as before. Level 5, you get extra attack, same as before, and fast movement, same as before. And at level 6, you get a subclass feature, same as before. And then at level 7, we get Feral Instinct, which is the same as both the previous playtest as well as the player's handbook, except the previous playtest version included the advantage on dexterity saving throws, which has moved back to level 2 in this version. And we get Instinctive Pounce. This is imported from the Tasha's optional class features, and for those, I'm pretty much universally sold on all the Tasha's optional class features, so I'm happy to see this included. Then at level 8, we get an ability score increase, same as before, and then level 9, Brutal Critical. So this has returned to 9th level. It was 11th level in playtest 5. It adds a d12 to damage. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, it's 1 damage die of the weapon, and in playtest 5, it was your Barbarian level. So if we're comparing this to the Player's Handbook version, at worst, it's equal, but often this will be improved, as Barbarians often wield weapons that aren't using a d12 for damage. If you're using unarmed strikes, you get the benefit as well, which is nice, though normally you're better off using a weapon than your unarmed strikes. When we compare it to playtest 5, when the playtest 5 Barbarian gets Brutal Critical at 11th level, it's adding a flat 11 points of damage to a critical, while this version is only adding 6.5 damage on average, and of course is far more swingy. So this is definitely weaker at that point. However, the scaling of this one is more dramatic, so at 13th level, both this and the playtest 5 version add 13 damage on average. And at 17th level, this actually averages slightly higher damage than the playtest 5 version. I suspect what happened is they must have had comments about players enjoying adding extra dice to critical hits. And I have to say, if I'm rolling physical dice, there's something satisfying about rolling a d12. Mechanically, though, this does not represent a very big damage boost. Assuming you're attacking recklessly twice per round, it's a little over 1 damage a round. Add a third attack through a bonus action attack or a reaction attack, it's still just about 2 points. You double that at 13th level and you triple it at 17th level. And when you're talking about a character that's probably doing 50 damage or more a round already, it's just a pretty small percentage increase. Especially when fighters are getting a third attack at level 11, and I guess now blade locks too, and paladins are adding a d8 to every attack, which is 2d8 on a critical, which averages more than a d12, plus a potential smite. This just doesn't keep up. Now, I have no problem with the existence of Brutal Critical, but it seems like the designers have leaned on Brutal Critical as the way that Barbarians are scaling their damage and attacks, and it's just not enough if that's the case. At level 10, there's a subclass feature, which is the same as both the Player's Handbook and the previous playtest. Level 11, we have Relentless Rage. It was level 15 in playtest 5, and it includes 2 times Barbarian level healing as it did in playtest 5. In the Player's Handbook, it's also level 11, but you only get 1 hit point back when you make the save. And this is okay, and it's good to see it gained at an earlier level, but compared to the power boost that most other classes see at level 11, the Barbarian could really use a bigger boost here. Or maybe this plus another whole feature. Monks and rogues suffer the same issue, but most classes see a dramatic power increase at level 11. And if most classes do, I figure it should be universal. At level 12, ability score increase, same as Player's Handbook and Playtest 5. Level 13, your Brutal Critical scales by 1 die, which is the same as the Player's Handbook, except now it's a d12 and usable with unarmed strikes. Level 14, there's a subclass feature, which is the same as both the Player's Handbook and Playtest 5. At level 15, we get Persistent Rage. This is the same level as in the Player's Handbook. It includes the If You Don Heavy Armor restriction from Playtest 5 that I don't think really matters, and it now provides a use of Rage if you're out of rages. And Playtest 5 got this at level 17. I'm not really a fan of features that only provide additional uses of limited features if you're out of them, like just allow you to recover 1 rage. Though I will say, in playtesting, I actually have yet to run out of rage thanks to that dramatic increase to duration. so maybe it doesn't matter so much. Level 16, we get an ability score increase, same as before. At level 17, the Brutal Critical Scales, which is the same as the Player's Handbook, except D12s and usable with unarmed strikes. And personally, I'd be in favor of every class that doesn't get 9th level spells at 17th level getting something amazing at level 17, and one extra critical die, it just isn't that. Level 18, we get Indomitable Might, which is the same as the Player's Handbook. It had been level 9 in Playtest 5. Now, when you're raging, you already have advantage on strength tests, so I would assume that most of the time you can reach or exceed your strength score with strength tests anyways. But this does provide some reliability. Then at level 19, we get an ability score increase, which is the same as both the Player's Handbook and Playtest 5, except now an ability score increase can raise an ability score to 22. With the Barbarian, this is especially relevant because of course you want to increase your strength to 22 here. But then we have level 20, Primal Champion, which is the same as the Player's Handbook, except you don't get the unlimited rages. At Playtest 5, you got an epic boon at this level. But like the Player's Handbook, this increases your maximum ability scores to 24, but creates a potential conflict with the ability score increase at 19. Because if you raised your strength or constitution to 22, then you only get a +2, since the max is 24. So what I'd like to see are these maximums raised to 26 to account for that. So overall, I think there's some impactful improvements here from the 2014 Player's Handbook. I mean, especially the 2014 Player's Handbook, but some from Playtest 5 as well, at the levels that see the most play. The Reckless Attack change is good. The moving Danger Sense back to level 2 is going to be helpful. Adding Instinctive Pounce, I think that's a good addition. However, what the Playtest 5 Barbarian didn't address was that Barbarian scaling at levels 11 and higher doesn't match most other classes, even most weapon-using classes, and that has not been addressed here either. A big feature at level 11 would have been such a positive. Relentless Rage, at least on its own, is not that feature. The Capstone return is appreciated because it had been watered down in Playtest 5. But with ability score increases providing 22 ability scores at level 19, this really could use an adjustment to account for that. I have really enjoyed playtesting the Playtest 5 Barbarian, and so I think I'll enjoy this as well. The changes to Rage and Reckless Attack basically are fixes for things that didn't quite work right before, so that is a huge positive. But let's move on to the subclasses. So let's start with the Path of the Berserker, and we saw this one in Playtest 5, and apparently it did very well in the surveys. 84%, anything over 80% is quite high, so the community was pretty happy with what they saw apparently. I have played it several times now, and I have to say, I am a fan. At level 3, you have Frenzy, which is the same as it was in Playtest 5. Since the extra damage is limited to your turn, it won't be affected by the changes to Reckless Attack. It's still going to be a once-on-your-turn thing. This does work really well, in my opinion. It's a significant damage increase with built-in scaling, and good riddance to the poor old Berserker who was so tired all the time. Level 6, Mindless Rage. This is the same as Playtest 5, and it's close to the version in the Player's Handbook, but removes the condition if you enter the rage rather than suppresses it. This is a great feature, though I wonder if rage itself on the base Barbarian should just include fear immunity, because nothing is more pitiful than a frightened, raging Barbarian. Then we have level 10, and we get Retaliation, which is the same as in Playtest 5. This was level 14 in the Player's Handbook. This feature is really going to benefit from being able to make reckless attacks off turn. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, this is the level 14 feature, and at this level they got Intimidating Presence, and the version in the Player's Handbook is terrible. So level 14, Intimidating Presence, which is the same as Playtest 5, but they changed it to a bonus action. So using this alone maintains your rage, by the way, if you want to do something besides attack with your action. And this version is a massive improvement from the pitiful Intimidating Presence from the Player's Handbook Berserker. So I'm assuming the designers turned this to a bonus action to kind of give it a little buff. And it's kind of a buff, but think about this. On the round you rage, which is often round 1, with playtest 5's Intimidating Presence, you could bonus action rage, then use your action for Intimidating Presence, so you could do them both on the same turn. And you can't do that anymore. And raging at the same time that you use this feature, I figured was thematically appropriate, right? Like, you rage, you make a big show of it, maybe you have a battle cry, and then the enemies quiver, and then you attack. And this, where you're going to rage, and then a round later, suddenly everyone's intimidated, that just, I don't know, seems a bit off to me. If they want to buff this from playtest 5, what they could do is make it a bonus action or allow it as part of a bonus action used to initiate rage. I'd be all for that. But the Berserker, it's a good subclass in the playtest and probably even better here than in playtest 5. And that was already good. The question after playtest 5 was whether the other Barbarian subclasses would be modified to be as good as the Berserker. And in my opinion, the answer is no, but let's take a closer look. So, starting with the Path of the Wild Heart, which was formerly Path of the Totem Warrior, I would assume that the name change falls in line with the general design direction we've seen, where they're taking features or subclass names that are tied to specific cultures and then make it more generic, freeing up the player to choose their own thematics. You can still have it be tied to totems and spirit animals if that's what you want, but that's no longer assumed in the subclass description. Another thing here, again, that's not a mechanical change, are they've changed the names of the features so that we don't have the same animals appearing at level 3 and level 6 and level 10 and level 14. And this way, the player knows that they don't have to choose the same animal each time, because that created some confusion. So changing that, changing the name, changing the names of the features, I'm on board for all of that. But those aren't mechanical changes. Let's talk about the mechanical stuff. Level 3, we have Animal Speaker, which was formerly Spirit Seeker. Other than the name change, the only other addition is specifying Wisdom as the spellcasting ability, and honestly, that's not going to make any difference. So let's talk about Rage of the Wilds, which was formerly Totem Spirit. And first, we have the Bear. This, of course, is one of the most notable changes to the Barbarian in this playtest. This used to provide resistance to all damage except for psychic, and was one of, if not the most popular Barbarian subclass in order to select Bear and get this feature. Now it provides 2 damage resistances of your choice that are chosen at the time of raging, and now both Force and Psychic are unavailable. This is objectively a nerf. The design notes say this nerf occurred because the Bear option was too powerful. I've seen some players comment that this actually isn't that big a nerf because you can just choose the damage types you need when you rage. And I suppose that is true if you know what the damage types an enemy will do. Like, you see a red dragon, okay, I obviously need fire resistance. And if you didn't rage earlier, in which with the extended rage duration is entirely possible, and you don't need force resistance, which used to be super rare, but we're seeing more monster design with force damage lately, like what if it's an amethyst dragon? That said, the Bear was the must-have option for Totem level 3, and if you're supposed to have 3 options, then you should have 3 options you might actually consider. At least, in my opinion, that's how it should work. We have Eagle, which used to give attacks of opportunity against you disadvantage and gave you a bonus action dash. Now the dash is also included on the turn you rage, which is good, and you get the disengage action on any turn you dash, so this option is definitely buffed. Then we have Wolf. It used to give allies advantage on attack rolls against enemies within 5 feet of you. Now it's within 10 feet of you, so also buffed, though I don't think this is a huge buff. Though I should mention that the extended duration of rage buffs all 3 of these options as well. The question though is, if you're going to nerf the Bear Totem, then does this subclass remain as good as, say, the Berserker, especially the redesigned Berserker? Like, are any of these options as good as Frenzy? And it's a bit hard to compare because Frenzy is a damage boost, and here we have a defensive boost, a mobility boost, or an ally buff. And these all seem decent to me, but definitely none are as good as the old bear option. So, Aspect of the Wilds was formerly Aspect of the Beast. All three options here are new. The old version gave you options between an improved carrying capacity, an advantage on pushing, pulling, or breaking objects, or a 1 mile vision distance and ignoring penalties for dim light, or ability to track at a fast pace and use stealth at a normal pace when traveling. And all of those options, I figured, were pretty bad. So now we have Elephant. This gives you proficiency in either athletics or insight, and if you already have proficiency, you get expertise instead. Owl's the same, except now it's investigation or perception, and Spider's the same, except it's either stealth or survival. And overall, I'd say this is a buff. Note that a lot of these skills benefit from primal knowledge, meaning they're also often based on strength, and the Wildheart Barbarian will already be rolling them with advantage a lot of the time. That said, I still don't think this is good enough for a 6th level feature. Skill proficiencies, even expertise, are pretty much ribbons, and we're talking about 1. Like, there's no way I would choose this over immunity to the frightened and charmed conditions. It's not even close. So I think there is a lot of room to buff these options a lot further. Then we get to level 10. We have Nature Seeker, which is ultimately the same as the player's handbook. There's some flavor text that's been removed, and wisdom is specified as the spellcasting ability score, which doesn't matter for this spell. Commune with nature, it's a great ritual spell, but there is no way this cuts it as an entire 10th level feature. Like, let's say you're playing a druid. You could select Commune Nature as the prepared spell you gain at level 10, great, but that would be on top of an entirely additional subclass feature and another 5th level spell slot. So objectively, this just does not compare. It needs to be this plus something else. Berserker Barbarians are getting regular reaction attacks at this level. Well, this is some decent utility, but is potentially available to other equivalent level or even lower level characters with relatively low resource expenditure. So it's just not good enough. So at level 14, we get Power of the Wilds. This was formerly Totemic Attunement. So we have the Lion, which imposes disadvantage on enemies within 5 feet of you to attack any targets other than you or another barbarian. And this is similar to the bear option in the player's handbook. The primary difference is that the player's handbook version gave enemies immunity to the feature if they couldn't see or hear you or were immune to being frightened. And so they've removed that, so this has definitely been buffed. Falcon gives a fly speed, but requires you aren't wearing armor. This is similar to the Eagle in the player's handbook, at least thematically. That one didn't have an armor requirement, but it only lasted until the end of the barbarian's turn. So each time on your turn, you could essentially jump really high, but you needed to land on the ground. So this has definitely been buffed. Then we have Ram, which is essentially the Topple Mastery, except it has a size restriction. This is similar to the Wolf in the player's handbook, which allowed you to knock a large or smaller creature prone using a bonus action after hitting it with a melee attack. There was no saving throw, but it used your bonus action, so this is probably buffed as well. But I think it is telling that the Ram option here, which is a 14th level feature, is objectively worse than a Weapon Mastery available at level 1. That's how good these features are. Berserkers, in contrast, are getting this huge area bonus action Frighten feature at this level. These look okay, but they just don't measure up. I guess the Falcon option is pretty good, but for the most part, I'd say this is on the weak side at 14th level. So, first, I should say there are some things in the Wildheart Barbarian I do appreciate. The features are better balanced against each other, and that's a big step in the right direction. Level 6 is better than it used to be. Level 14 is better than it used to be as well. However, this is much weaker than the Berserker subclass. Level 3 might be fine as is, but level 6, 10, and 14 all could use more. In any case where you give a ritual spell as a subclass feature on a non-spellcaster, it's a ribbon, and needs to be given in combination with another feature. So, there's a pretty dramatic balance issue, where the Berserker is just a much better subclass option. Path of the World Tree. So this is a brand new subclass, and this is based on myths of a world tree that connects various planes of existence. The example they give you is Yggdrasil from Norse Myth, but world tree myths show up all over the place in different cultures, so it certainly doesn't have to be that one. Level 3, you get Vitality of the Tree. So when you enter your rage, you recover a number of hit points equal to your barbarian level. And at the start of each of your turns while your rage is active, you can give an ally within 10 feet a number of temporary hit points equal to a number of d6s based on your rage damage bonus. So it's like the damage bonus for Berserker Barbarians, except we're giving temporary hit points for an ally instead. Unlike most temporary hit points, these ones only last as long as the rage, though that could be as much as 10 minutes. I notice a couple of pain points on this feature right away. First, the healing you give yourself, it's often going to be wasted if you're already at or near full hit points. Like, your first rage in the day is pretty much guaranteed to waste the healing. So maybe you should be getting temporary hit points as well. In fact, maybe it should be your barbarian level plus your constitution modifier and temporary hit points instead, because that would compare more closely with the Fiend Pact Warlocks that are getting the ability to give themselves temporary hit points at 3rd level. Second, you can only give the temporary hit points afterwards to allies. But if you've played a barbarian, you probably know that most of the time you're the character taking the damage. So there is a good chance nobody could use those temporary hit points like you could. Maybe nobody can use them at all, but the feature specifies they must be given to somebody else. They also have to be within 10 feet of you at the start of your turn. So I think there's something here, but this needs a rework, frankly. Then level 6, Branches of the Tree. While raging, whenever a creature you can see ends its turn within 20 feet of you, you can teleport them as a reaction to any unoccupied space within 5 feet of you, but it must be on a surface or a liquid that can support it. If the creature is unwilling, it makes a strength saving throw to avoid being teleported. And I think this is super cool thematically, and a reaction-based teleport of an ally or an enemy with no additional resource expended seems really powerful mechanically. And it would be, except you got a 20-foot range. That is a very short range, and it is going to limit the use of this a lot. Like, I would imagine on most rounds, you may never have a good use of this. And this is the level where the Berserker gets immunity to Charmed and Frightened while raging. Mechanically, this is no comparison. Then at level 10, we have Battering Roots. So this increases the reach of your melee weapons by 10 feet, and when you hit with it, you activate the Push or Topple mastery in addition to any other mastery the weapon already has that you can use. So first off, this is a massive reach increase. Let's say you're using a reach weapon to begin with. Well, now you have a 20-foot reach, which is massive. But now I'm thinking of that 6th level feature again. And even if the aim of using it was to teleport something outside of my reach into my reach, well, now if they're within 20 feet, they're already within my reach, or maybe within my reach if I'm using a reach weapon. And that's just not good synergy of subclass features. I also question the value of Topple with the extended reach, because if a creature more than 5 feet away from me gains the prone condition, well, then I have disadvantage to attack them. Push seems interesting, like you could push a creature next to you 10 feet away, and then you could hit them again without moving, potentially pushing them out of your reach, and definitely pushing them out of their reach. So you wouldn't need to worry about opportunity attacks if you wanted to back away. Push plus Topple or Slow could also potentially keep melee enemies far enough away from you so they would have difficulty closing within their own reach. And mechanically overall, I think this adds up to a pretty good feature, though it does highlight the limitations of the 6th level feature even further. And I think you have to consider carefully how to make the most out of the extra mastery property. There's only 2 subclasses that can use 2 weapon masteries on the same attack though, and it happens to be the 2 new ones. This one and the Brawler subclass at level 15 in Fighter. Then level 14, Travel Along the Tree. So you get either a teleport or plane shift essentially once per long rest. Though you can spend 5 uses of rage. which at this level is all of them, and at any level is at least almost all of them to do it again. As soon as I heard about this feature in the introduction to this playtest, I just hoped the designers didn't figure that this kind of feature could be treated as anything other than a utility ribbon. The thing is, teleportation and plane shift are for the most part utility spells. This means your 14th level spellcaster can take these spells, but doesn't need to use their spell slots on them most of the time. But they're willing to when they need to. Otherwise, they spend those spell slots on something else. The Path of the World Tree Barbarian here gets no other options. So if they don't need to teleport or plane shift, which I assume would be most days, then this becomes a dead level for them. Here's what I'd like to see. Another option here that maybe functions like a scatter spell, rearranging positions in a combat. Something like that could present a tactical option that still fits the thematics of the feature. And then your Path of the World Tree Barbarian could choose between the teleport, the plane shift, or the scatter when they use the feature. That would be pretty decent. But first of all, I should say, I appreciate new toys, and brand new subclasses are very, very welcome. I even like the theme here. But there is some mechanical stuff, it's just not where it needs to be. The 6th level feature and the 14th level feature in particular, they need some juice. Maybe a bigger range for level 6, in fact I think that's almost certainly what needs to happen, and a tactical option for level 14, at a minimum. Again, this just does not match the Berserker mechanically. Finally, we have the Path of the Zealot, and this one is going to be tough for me. The 14th level feature, Rage Beyond Death from the Xanathar Zealot, is my favorite Barbarian feature, period. That feature alone was the only reason I would even consider playing a Barbarian past level 11, considering my issues with that I've already talked about. And now it's gone, or at least redesigned from the ground up. So let's see what's left. Well, at level 3 we get Divine Fury. This feature adds a d6 plus half your Barbarian level and damage to the first creature you hit with the weapon on your turn while you're raging. This has been expanded to include unarmed strike attacks. In Xanathar's, this damage was Radiant. Now you can choose between Radiant or Necrotic whenever you deal the damage. It used to be this was the only level 3 Barbarian feature that allowed you to increase your own damage. Now we have Frenzy for Berserker, which is a fairly similar feature. So let's compare the expected damage of that feature and this one by level. Since critical hits improve both damages, and I would assume about 10% chance to crit, I will include that extra damage rounded up to the nearest decimal point in these numbers. So, at some levels, the difference is pretty dramatic, and at other levels, it's pretty close. But at all levels, the Berserker feature delivers more damage on average than Divine Fury. Divine Fury has 3 potential advantages over Frenzy. First, it has the flexible damage type. Second, they don't need to Reckless Attack to get the extra damage. And finally, Frenzy is the Berserker's only feature at level 3, and the Zealot gets one more. Overall though, if we were just comparing straight features, I'll take Frenzy. But Zealots also get Warrior of the Gods. So in Xanathar's, this allowed the Zealot to be raised from the dead with a spell without the costly component. This Zealot retains that benefit, but it also gains an additional d12 hit points whenever they gain hit points from a magic item or a spell, a number of times equal to their Constitution modifier per long rest. So this could be used to enhance a healing potion, for example. Healing potion delivers 2d4 plus 2 in healing, or 7 on average. A d12 almost doubles the amount on average. Now, this amount doesn't scale with your level, and it is going to feel like a whole lot more at level 3 than when you're level 13. But add this to Divine Fury, and I think the Zealot makes out pretty well at level 3. Maybe a bit behind the Berserker, but comparable. And I'm okay if it's not perfectly balanced. Comparable is fine, as long as it remains comparable at higher levels. But level 3, no problems with the Zealot. Then we got level 6, Fanatical Focus. This is completely unchanged from Xanathar's. When the Zealot who is raging fails a saving throw, once during that rage, they get a reroll. I used to say this is like Indomitable except once per rage. However, Indomitable is way better now, so this is more like the 2014 Indomitable except once per rage. And it's not a bad feature. Keep in mind there are some saving throws, particularly at higher levels, where a reroll probably doesn't matter. Like, if you have a +1 wisdom saving throw and fail against a DC of 19, well, the odds are very high that a reroll is just going to result in a second failure. Still, I will take this over expertise in one skill that the Wild Heart gets at this level, or maybe even the 20-foot teleport thing from the World Tree. I'm not taking it over immunity to Charmed and Frightened, though. So level 6 is where all the other Barbarian subclasses really fall behind the Berserker subclass, and it only gets worse from there. At level 10, they get Zealot's Presence. This feature allows our Zealot to unleash a battle cry that gives up to 10 other creatures within 60 feet advantage on attack rolls and saving throws until the start of our next turn. There are 2 improvements here from the Xanathar's version. First, the allies no longer need to be able to hear you. And for the most part, that shouldn't make a difference, but it's worth noting. And secondly, it used to be once per long rest, but now you can use it again using one of your rages. If you have extra uses of rage, that could be worthwhile, though I would not value this as highly as rage. But I would value it higher than an unused rage. The benefit isn't that huge. I mean, it's comparable to a Kobold's Draconic Cry, mechanically. I'd say just let the Zealot use this once during each rage with no additional resource cost. I think that'd be fine. As it is, it's definitely weaker than the 10th level features of either the Berserker or the Path of the World Tree Barbarians. And at level 14, Rage Beyond Death. So like I said, my favorite Barbarian feature, period. In Xanathar's, this allows the Zealot to not fall unconscious at 0 hit points, and they keep fighting until their rage is over. If they got some healing before their rage ended, they didn't die. It was awesome. And it's gone. Now, if your Relentless Rage restores hit points, so that's the one where if you drop to 0 hit points, you get the Constitution saving throw to regain some hit points, but it scales by 5 from a DC of 10 every time it's used. Well, when you get hit points from that feature, you get 2 benefits. First, you get a fly speed and can hover and are incorporeal. Second, when you're hit by an attack roll, you can use your reaction to turn it to a miss. I think thematically, I get what they're going for here. Like, you drop to 0 hit points and you kind of die, and then your spectral ghost keeps on fighting. Though apparently your non-spectral body disappears, so that's a bit weird. But I think that's what they're going for. And both the benefits you gain here are crazy good. Here's the issue. The form lasts for 1 minute or until you regain any hit points or you drop to 0 hit points, and can't use this feature again until you complete a long rest. So Relentless Rage will give you 28 hit points back at this level. At level 14, 28 hit points is nothing. In a difficult combat, which is the combat I would assume this would come up in the first place, that ain't gonna take a minute. Might not even last until the end of the turn where this came into effect. And then it's gone until you complete a long rest. But okay, it's way worse than the old Rage Beyond Death, but let's compare it to the other subclasses presented. I mean, it's better than the utility feature that the Path of the World Tree gets. It's probably worse than the Path of the Wild Hearts options. Like, that one can give you flight that lasts through your entire rage. And it's probably worse than Intimidating Presence for the Berserker, which can be used multiple times and has great range and a mass effect. And the Zealot has been my pick for the best Barbarian subclass for a while now. I think pretty much since it was published. Now, this is just a playtest draft, but overall, I would say the Zealot has been nerfed pretty hard with the loss of Rage Beyond Death. It was their premier feature, and has been replaced with a below-average 14th level feature. And I don't think this kept up with the improvements to the Berserker, though it's still comparable to the other 2 subclasses presented here. So there is a balance problem with these subclasses. I was worried that the other 3 Barbarian subclasses might not be as good as the Berserker, and they aren't. Some of their features are comparable, but they all have some features that just don't measure up. So overall, I was pretty impressed with the playtest 5 Barbarian, and the same things that impressed me there appear to have survived and continue to impress me here. Great. The change to Reckless Attack, also much appreciated, and it addressed the issue that Reckless Attack had a benefit that lasted a turn and a penalty that lasted a round. Matching those up makes sense, and it just seems to be the right call, but it's also a significant buff. My issue with the playtest 5 Barbarian, though, was not addressed. The best Barbarian features are pretty much all gained in the first 10 levels. This includes presented subclass features as well. If there's really a good reason not to multiclass out at level 10, I don't know what it is. Other classes get some very big features at level 11 and onwards. The only two classes that are really left behind are the Barbarian and the Monk. That used to include the Rogue as well, but at least to some degree that's been addressed in the last playtest. The Barbarian, though, it's still in a rough spot at higher levels. But if you're playing in a game where you're not exceeding 10th level, I'd recommend the Berserker at this point. It's totally solid. At these levels, you should notice a dramatic improvement over the 2014 Barbarian. Now, if you're curious about damage, I did calculations for a 13th level Berserker Barbarian at level 13, and I came up with 58.3 damage per round. None of those numbers have really changed, as this does not include reaction attacks, and the bonus critical damage is 13 in both cases, so it's still 58.3. What I will say is that Frenzy made up for 10.37 of that 58.3 DPR. So if you are a Path of the World Tree or Wild Heart Barbarian, it's more like 48, so just behind the fighter. Zealot is doing around 56, so much closer to Berserker, though still a little bit behind. Now I should point out that the Barbarian in these calculations is using Reckless Attack, which provides their opponents advantage to hit them. So I'm not sure any Barbarian should be out-damaged by classes without that penalty, like the fighter, for example. But that's where we are. Like I said, a boost at level 11 I think is warranted. Speaking of fighters, though, that will be the next playtest class I'll be deep diving. But until then, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.